Peace, family. Y'all know who it is. It's Dr. Bakari K. Lumumba, LumumbaSpeaks.com, in conjunction with, of course, Bequaline Network, the Pan African social media extraordinaire, and the home, of course, of African Centered news and information. Back once again, we have a great show, family, so we want to make sure that you tap in. If you're watching, make sure you hit the subscribe and like button. Thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. Make sure you hit the notification bell and make sure that you are a blessing to the show via, of course, Cash App, Venmo, or the Super Chat. And today we're going to be drawing from our Lessons from History series, right? So we talk about lessons from history, honoring the moral obligation to remember. Today we're going to honor the moral obligation to remember the Aba Women's War, right? And we know that our Lessons from History series teaches us to honor, of course, the moral obligation to remember our ancestors who, in intrepid contravention of the Ma'afa, displayed a consistent level of valor, faith, heroism, gallantry, spirit, and tenacity unseen throughout the world. So I want to make sure everyone, of course, as you all know, the link is in the description. The link is in the description. So you can, of course, tap it anytime. The link will be in the chat momentarily. Put a 1 in the chat, family, if you are familiar with the Aba Women's War, and put a 2 in the chat if you're unfamiliar. So once again, put a 1 in the chat if you are familiar with, of course, the Aba Women's War. Put a 2 in the chat if you are unfamiliar with the Women's War. So once again, family, put a 1 in the chat, and put a 2 in the chat if you are unaware. Definitely want to hear from you all about the Aba Women's War, which of course took place 96 years ago. And we would discuss, of course, the historical significance of the Aba Women's War during our broadcast today. Happy Pan African Saturday. Mr. Sandman, okay, shout out. Hey, you got to tap in because, the Ohio State Buckeyes, we just gave you all some work, as you know. We are Penn State, right? So we would discuss the significance of that amongst other issues pertinent to, of course, the African world here, of course, in the diaspora and, of course, on the continent. But we're going to make sure we're gonna have a great show today. I'm gonna put the link in the description in the chat, family. So if anyone wants to tap in, of course, we can get started. But yes, today marks, of course, the 96th anniversary of the Aba Women's War. And of course, many of you may be aware if you subscribe to the channel that we actually had a Black History Fact, of course, today regarding the Aba Women's War. So we always want to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to inform our brothers and sisters of our history and the importance of learning history so that we do not repeat it. So once again, family, when we talk about the Aba Women's War, it took place in southeastern Nigeria. Southeastern Nigeria consisted of 6 different ethnic groups of women, most prominent, of course, were the Igbo. And so they took umbrage with, of course, the warrant chief. So if anyone is familiar with the British colonial system, the British colonial system practiced what was known as indirect rule, where they, of course, would, what we would call in a rather pejorative term, they would elect or hire puppets to run their affairs, right? And so the warrant chiefs were engaging in a political practice that prohibited women from being engaged in the political process. This is something that, of course, we know is alien to, of course, an African way of doing things. And so the sisters, these queen mothers, as we would like to say, pushed back against that, protested against that. And of course, this led to the, of course, Aba Women's War. Of course, part of what took place was they were there, of course, they found being taxed problematic, right? And so we always hear about, the Boston Tea Party when we go to school. And of course, the colonialists had taken the umbrage with being taxed by the British government. But we don't talk about the Women's War, in which, of course, our sisters took umbrage with being taxed by the colonial government as well. So that would be, of course, an example of miseducation that we're learning the history of one group of people standing up against, of course, they were considered tyranny and, of course, economic exploitation, but we don't learn about when we do it, right? So just something to consider there. But also, right, one of the tactics that was used, right, when we talk about the war, was actually non-violent, right? Some people call it a riot, but many historiographers and historians call it a war. Was they used what was known as a sit-in, right? This concept of sitting in and, of course, protesting in a non-violent manner, but also this connects to the concept and idea of sitting on a man, in which a man in the community was accused of engaging in problematic behavior, untoward behavior, particularly towards a woman, the sisters of the community would come together and sit on a man. They would go to his place of business or even his home, and they would, chant, they would protest, they would demonstrate until, of course, he acquiesced to the demands to make whatever grievance he engaged in right. So, once again, family, if you are familiar with the women's ward, you can put a one in the chat. And if you're unfamiliar, put a two in the chat. The link is in the description now. And the link is in the chat so you can tap in and be part of the conversation. Once again, this is another in our series. This is another live in our series, Lessons from History series, where we honor the moral obligation to remember. Today we're honoring the ABBA Women's War of 1929, family. So once again, tap in, be part of the conversation. You're watching, of course, LumumbaSpeaks.com and Black Empowerment Initiative, where we believe we could gain a competitive advantage by always betting on Black, in conjunction with, of course, the Equal Line Network, the Pan-African Social Media Extraordinaire, in the home of African-centered news and information. And we're discussing the ABBA Women's War of 1929. So tap in, family, be part of the conversation. I hope Mr. Sandman taps in because, he's a big-time Penn State fan. As you all may be aware if you follow college football, the Ohio State University, the reigning defending national champs and the number one team in the country, we were able to take care of business and defeat the Penn State Nittany Lions for the 9th consecutive year. That's right, family. You heard me correctly. For the 9th consecutive year, we beat the Penn State Nittany Lions, and it wasn't actually close. Of course, we won 38-14. It was a bit of a battle at halftime. Score was 17-14, but Ohio State was, of course, able to pull out a victory, but really, take over the second half and really show that we have more dudes, right? More Jims and Joes than, of course, Penn State. So tap in, family. Be part of the conversation. We'd love to hear from you all regarding the ABBA Women's War of 1929. Once again, this is another live regarding our series, Lessons from History, honoring the moral obligation to remember. So once again, family, tap in, be part of the conversation. Let us know if you were familiar, of course, with the ABBA Women's War. If you were not, you can put a 2 in the chat. If you were, put a 1 in the chat. But then most importantly, we want to make sure that we're looking at the historical context, why this took place, and of course, pushing back against the prevaricating notion that women should not be involved in politics. So definitely want to hear from you all regarding the ABBA Women's War. So once again, family, put a 1 in the chat if you are familiar with the ABBA Women's War. Put a 2 in the chat if you are unfamiliar with the ABBA Women's War. I'm going to put a 1 in the chat because I am familiar. I better be. I'm doing the live. Then you can put, of course, a 2 in the chat if you are unfamiliar with the ABBA Women's War. Mr. Sandman, what's the word? Philadelphia. Some people say Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. What's the word?
Hey, what's the word? Can you hear me?
I hear you just fine. The word is that, we just beat the Ohio State University. We beat Penn State University for the 9th consecutive year.
Yeah, well, it's 2025, a lot of crazy stuff going on, but hey, we all expected that. They was big time favorites. This is a lost season for the Penn State Nittany Lions, but we're gonna rebound next year. Of course, we won't start off the season, as highly rated as we was this year, but we're gonna just inch our way back in there, rebound. And go back to work. That's what football is all about. That's why we love this game.
Okay, who's going to be your coach?
What was that?
Who's going to be your coach?
Oh, who knows? I mean, I ain't really been keeping track of that. I mean, they got a lot of work to do. I don't even know who the intern coach is right now.
Okay.
But I wouldn't mind bringing my man Eddie George. I mean, I know I think he been coaching the HBCU.
He's at Bowling Green right now.
Bowling Green? Oh, okay, yeah. I wouldn't mind bring in a little Eddie George. We got to bring in coaches that can They know how to recruit. They know how to talk to players. That was the last coach's strength. But when it came to like game planning and getting his team ready to play against top competition, he just was uh, underwhelming to say the least.
Absolutely. So speaking of underwhelming, let's talk about someone or some entities that were overwhelming. Let's talk about the Apple Women's War. You put a two in the chat. You said that you were unaware of the Apple Women's War. Is that correct?
Yes, I was unaware of it, but while while right before the show started, I did a small bit of research on it, and from my understanding, this incident happened in conjunction with the financial crisis, the international financial crisis that was going on after World War I, and the British wanted to
You're talking
impose
about the
more
Great
taxes,
Depression. You're talking about the Great Depression.
or the Great Depression, yeah, and the British intended to impose more taxation
Yes.
on the people in Nigeria because it was colonized, and it just so happens that culturally our ethnic groups in West Africa, our women tend to be um, some of the biggest earners when it comes to making money in the markets.
Hmm.
So a way for the British to stick their hand in the candy jar and get more money out of the situation, or I don't know, more wealth out of the situation and more taxation out of the situation, was to unfairly tax the females that were entrepreneurs as well. So
Right.
and they fought back,
Absolutely.
and it seems like it happened during the rainy season. I don't know if that had a tremendous impact on their strategy, but we know that West Africa or different parts of Africa have rainy seasons, and with this happening in what was in the October November time frame,
In November, December.
November December time frame. Okay, maybe that impacted the strategy they utilized, but I know they organized and they were very effective on breaking down the system that
Right.
the British tried to impose on them to tax them. And it seems like do you think events like this are similar to women's suffrage in the
Well,
United States?
I mean, some scholars connect this to, of course, gender studies, right? But I think the issue here is when you talk about women's suffrage, particularly we talk about white women's suffrage, right? Or women's suffrage in the West, that was an issue of women trying to make an inroad into political, an inroad into politics that they were historically prohibited from. This is a situation in which black women took an issue with the fact that they're being removed from being engaged from the political process, right? So that's something to consider in terms of a difference between uh, the women's war, one of the issues in the women's war, and this issue of suffrage, and then of course, and suffrage in the West as well.
Well, even though the British were using African chiefs to
Yes, war chief.
be the puppet masters to manipulate the situation that caused the women's war in West Africa and Nigeria.
Hmm.
You wonder, like, with a lot of in in Western culture, you know, historically women weren't really allowed to own a lot of property, and you look at like our history in West Africa, where it's a maternal lineage thing, whereas though
You mean matrilineal? Well, so wait. You said in West Africa, women weren't able to own much property.
no, I'm talking about in Western culture,
Oh,
as in
yeah,
like
Western, yeah, Western culture, yes,
yeah, as in like the United States and the British,
yes,
it's patrilineal, meaning that ownership and property was passed
that's
down
our,
through the father.
yes,
In our
on
culture,
the father's line rather than the mother's. Yep.
yeah, in our culture, in West Africa, ownership is passed down through the mother's line.
Traditionally, yes.
Yeah, traditionally. So you wonder that conflict in the way that the British do things and the way that we did things, our ancestors did things in West Africa, caused a lot of conflict and disorganization in the natural way that we conducted business. Because if you know things are maternal and on the and our valuables are passed down maternally, then if you're going to introduce a Western culture to people who traditionally did something completely opposite, it seems like that's a huge adjustment on the way that we operate.
Yes. And of course, the sisters took umbrage with that. They said that's, not our cultural way of being. And of course, they pushed back. So,
Yeah, they push back, and the British are saying, "Well, we need to tax, we need to tax this colony in Nigeria, but the people here um, that control the markets are the females, so to speak. But militarily, if we want to control this area, then we have to fight the men who are the soldiers." I don't know. It's just the dynamics of the whole situation seems like it was against us from the very beginning. Just the whole dynamics of the situation just seemed like it's not a just not in our favor to fight in that type of conflict.
I'm sorry. What conflict are you speaking to?
Well, I'm just saying. Well, of course, if the British colonize Nigeria in those areas, I'm assuming that they did that, through attrition over years and partly through force and
Primarily,
war.
yeah, primarily through sports. That's what took place first. It was about force.
Yeah, they did it by force. So if traditionally, if we have societies or cultures, and ethnic groups in those areas that are protecting their land and their resources from an outside group like the British, and the people that are protecting that land primarily are the men, and then I guess you can easily put in their ear the men like, hey, we just want this resource from you, but the men say, well, if you want this resource, you got to take it from the women because we don't have ownership of this resources. This is maternal ownership, like the gold, the land. We're just
Well, we
stewards
don't.
of the land.
Well, yeah, I think that's respectfully, it would be a misinterpretation of history, even though things were passed down in a matrilineal manner. And this sister talks about it right here in this book, Male Daughters, Female Husbands, right? She talks about even though it was matrilineal, patriarchy still ruled, and the man would get the lion's share of the actual um, inheritance, even though it was supposed to go down the female line. So that was not the case. It was simply an issue of the British using indirect rule, but they were trying to exclude women from political participation because they viewed that as, of course, chaotic. The fact that men and women worked and can companion with each other, and of course they wanted to, of course, impose their own cultural way of being on non-European people.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a complex dynamic. Those two separate cultural systems clashing like that, and our ancestors or our homeland being colonized by a culture that's like completely opposite is just I don't know. It's just a, a recipe for disaster, and you can see why even till today there's some issues in regards to uh, Nigeria and it operating within the Western society that's dominated global trade. But like so you're saying that it was passed down maternally, but the men still inherited the lion's share. So
Yes,
what does that mean? So like,
because of
if
patient.
the does that mean that if you inherited like some gold or some land, that means you got it from your mother's side?
Well, what I'm stating is, and of course I'm quoting, of course, this book, Male Daughters, Female Husbands, Gender and Sex in an African Society, right? She states that even though the inheritance was supposed to go be, there was supposed to be a matrilineal line of inheritance, the boys, right, and the men still received the lion's share because of patriarchy. So what she articulates, they simply took it, right? Hey, we're the men, and we're going. This is what it's going to be, even though per custom or by law, it was supposed to be given to the women.
Okay. So how come women didn't fight back in those regards?
I would have to do a deeper dive in terms of if that was the case, but she just said it was due to patriarchy.
Okay. So
Yeah,
just them being physically stronger than the black woman, they were
that would that
able
would
just
that
to
would be
take it.
that would be my presumption.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and it's just interesting. But in this particular instance, the British are using, black chiefs or African chiefs to take
Well,
advantage
no,
of the.
they were using warrant chiefs. So these are individuals that were chiefs in actually their own culture. These were individuals that were selected by the British as individuals who would be able to efficiently promote their colonial regime, and they were made warrant chiefs.
Were these men that were warrant chiefs, were they of Nigerian descent?
Yeah, yes, they were Nigerian, but they weren't chiefs in their own society. They were just men in their society who British picked because they vetted them and saw that they would be amenable to, of course, having a token position and carrying out the colonial order of the day.
Oh, okay. So basically, almost the same thing that's going on today.
Yeah,
Just the
basically, it
puppets.
is the same thing that's going on today. They would select puppets, particularly they would select individuals who were marginalized in their own society, and then give them a position of power in the colonial regime.
Mm.
Yes, a great example of that is in the book Things Fall Apart. Chinua Achebe discusses that in Things Fall Apart, that they were selecting individuals who were marginalized in their own societies and giving them positions of power, petty positions of power in the colonial regime to carry out their, of course, machinations.
Hmm. That's a powerful strategy to take down the kingdom right there.
No, absolutely. That's what's always done. That I mean, the CIA. That's what the CIA did with Gaddafi in Libya, right? I mean, that's what you do. But I want to make sure we're focusing and centering this conversation, family, on the agency of the sisters in Nigeria. We know we hear a number of stories about, of course, unfortunately, tribalism on the continent, particularly in Nigeria. But in this particular situation, during the ABBA Women's War of 1929, six different ethnic groups of women, and I'm not going to name the ethnic groups because I don't want to butcher them. Of course, we know I had that colonized or colonial tongue, right? Not the indigenous tongue. Came together, they coalesced to work together to, of course, uh, take umbrage and, of course, advocate and protest against the exclusion of women politically in colonial Nigeria, because the exclusion of women in Nigeria, or what we now know and call Nigeria, was, of course, alien to, of course, their culture. And so I think that conversation always needs to focus, particularly when we talk about lessons from history, uh, honoring the moral obligations to remember, on the agency of the sisters who, of course, engaged in that riot or women's war. As you all were able to see on the thumbnail, that was an actual picture taken by sisters who were unfortunately rounded up and, I remember correctly, arrested for their protest as a result of that protest. So we definitely want to give a shout out to, of course, the photographer who, pays by hook or crook, actually was able to support us in what we're doing today. You get an actual look at the sisters who were engaging and putting in that work nearly 100 years ago.
Mm.
Yes.
So, what are the names of some of the women who were the catalysts for this war for the women's rights in eastern Nigeria,
The
southeastern Nigeria?
Southeast, yes. So I can give you some names. I just don't want to butcher them. So in So Madame Inwanyiro, I don't want to butcher her name. I should say it before I have a colonial tongue, but she was considered one of the primary contributors to the Women's War. When we talk about militancy of women in Nigeria, she was advanced in age compared to many of the women who led the protests. Under her advice, the women protested the song and dance, sitting on the war in chief. Once again, that concept of sitting on a man until they surrendered their insignia of office and resigned. As a revolt spread, other groups followed this pattern, making the women's protest a peaceful one. Other groups came to her to get in writing the inspirational results of the protest. I'm going to put her name in the link, family. I'm going to put her name in the link. So, put her name in the link. Yeah. She's an Igbo woman living in colonial Nigeria. Absolutely. Okay. Right. So,
It's fascinating how even 90s or 100 years ago, how the global economy was so interconnected,
mhm.
so so much so that it had a major impact on the groups or the groups in the southeastern side of Nigeria,
Yes.
African groups. Yeah.
Yes. Well, and that's something Roger Rodney talked about in his book that, of course, how Europe underdeveloped Africa was what he calls dependency theory, and that the colonial apparatus, one of the roles of the colonial apparatus was to make, of course, African nations, markets dependent on core nations, right? The mother countries. Economically, we talk about, world systems theory in terms of you have core, semi-peripheral, and then peripheral nations. And then, of course, the African continent and the 55 nations that, of course, call Africa home would be peripheral economies that are dependent on semi-peripheral and, of course, core nations for the economic stability and well-being. That creates a, of course, dependent economic model in which one is, of course, beholden to the largesse of the former colonial powers in a manner that we now know and call neocolonialism.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, do you know how history has a tendency to repeat itself? Do you see
Of course.
like any correlation between what happened then in the Women's War and what might be happening now with, because we have a lot of African American women um, fighting a lot of having a lot of political stance in American culture as well, not just today, but even throughout our history. Do you think it's just in our bloodline for our women to be
Well,
political fighters like that?
yeah, I think that's a great question, Mr. Sandman. You're cooking today. I mean, Penn State wasn't cooking on the field, but you're cooking here on this line, right? That is a great question. I would argue that it's one or two things. One, I would argue black women are engaged politically, particularly black women here in the African diaspora, are engaged politically because it's part of our cultural personality as African people, right? We don't see that just here in the United States. We see that, of course, contemporarily with the great Pan Africanist work of Mia Motley in Barbados. We see that in Jamaica, where what the only female national hero was Queen Nanny of the Maroons, who, of course, we know was from what is now known as President Ghana. We look at, of course, the sisters in the struggle in, of course, Haiti during the Haitian Revolution. We talk about Cecil Bateman, Victoria Montu, of course, Marie Latimer, right? So we see this practice of course, sisters being in the struggle. We could talk about, of course, Gloria Richardson, writer one, Fannie Lou Hamer, Mary Church Terrell, and of course the list goes on. We're talking about the great line of divine that, of course, is Queen Motherhood here in the death decades and dysphoria of the African diaspora. However, I would argue that you could make an argument contemporarily. We're seeing black women engage in a form of political activism that is geared or steered by external actors, particularly we could make the argument alien ideologies such as feminism. Then, of course, the of course influx and growing prominence of pop culture, right? I think a great example would be, and I don't know the artist's name, family, so please forgive me because I'm not, really tuned in or locked into, of course, present day rap music. But there was a sister who received an award at the BET Award, and hopefully Mr. Stedman can tap back in. But a week before she received that award, she was asked a question about what what in a man makes him toxic, or what is a red flag in a man, and she stated on the show that a red flag in a man was if he was heterosexual, right? Which is, of course, absolutely nonsensical. The presumption would be that if you are a heterosexual woman and you're looking for a relationship with a man, you want that man to be heterosexual. And absolutely nonsensical. Then a week later, she was trying to make a political protest supporting, of course, those who were protesting ICE in Los Angeles. SSR, appreciate you, brother. Hopefully you can tap in and be part of the conversation. Put a 1 in the chat if you are familiar with the women's war. Put a 2 in the chat if you are not, right? So I would argue a lot of what we see nowadays oftentimes is political activism by men and women, but of course we're having a conversation about women because we're of course honoring the women's war. I would argue that it's motivated by external, keyword external actors, external forces. I think a great example would be, of course, Black Lives Matter. I think most of us here on this live agree with the concept of Black Lives Matter. And we want police accountability. Should take umbrage, issue an umbrage, of course, with the extrajudicial killings of African Americans, but Black people, period, because they aren't just African Americans nowadays. However, what we find is that the impetus behind, of course, Black Lives Matter, the organization, not the movement, but the organization, was, of course, feminism. Of course, they raised funds at the tune of $90 million last I checked, based on, of course, the deletion of Black men by, of course, the police, state actors. And then, unfortunately, what we find is we're then advocating for creating Black communities absent of Black men, right? So something to consider. We know Dr. T. Hassan Johnson discusses these issues rather poetically on his, of course, YouTube channel. So if you haven't, of course, subscribed to, of course, Dr. T. Hassan Johnson's live, his YouTube channel, make sure you do so. But Snapshot Reviews, tap in, be part of the conversation. We'd love to hear from you, brother. And we could, of course, do a brief review of what the Apple Women's War is. And I'm quite sure you're Googling that right now. So once again, family, you're watching, of course, LaMunaSpeaks.com, a Black empowerment initiative where we believe you could gain competitive advantage by always betting on Black, in conjunction with Bequeline Network, the Pan-African Social Media Extraordinaire, and the home of African-centered news and information. And this is another live, another show in our, of course, series, Lessons from History, honoring the moral obligation to remember. And today, on Pan-African Saturday, right, we are discussing the ABBA Women's War of 1929. Tap in, family. The link is in the description. I will put the link in the chat. Tap in and be part of the conversation. We would love to hear from you all on this Pan-African Saturday regarding the ABBA Women's War. And of course, we could connect this, family, to contemporary issues in the Black community, in the African community, irrespective of what side of the pond you are on. That's the term used by our British brothers and sisters. So definitely want to hear from you all. Like, subscribe, share, hit the thumbs up button. Thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. And make sure you are a blessing to the show via, of course, Cash App, Venmo, and Super Chat. So tap in, family. The link is in the description. The link is in the chat. I hope Mr. Samuel can tap back in and be part of the conversation. But we're discussing, of course, the Apple Women's War of 1929. If you are unfamiliar with the Apple Women's War, the Apple Women's War was, of course, a protest, of course, by Nigerian women in southeastern Nigeria. They were protesting not only the implementation of warrant chiefs in southeastern Nigeria that prohibited Black women from playing a role in politics, but also they took umbrage with the increased taxation of women in colonial Nigeria. And as Mr. Sandman stated, and this was in part in connection with, of course, the economic crisis that we now know and call the Great Depression. So this was 96 years ago, family. 96 years ago, this took place. So tap in and be part of the conversation. And one of the, of course, methods that they use to, of course, protest and successfully lead to, of course, the abolition of the warrant chief position was what is known as a sit-in, right? So many may argue that this concept and idea of doing sit-ins is something that Dr. King learned via nonviolent direct action, peaceful protest, this concept of satyagraha. However, we find but that's not necessarily the case, right? That we find that there was a practice of nonviolent direct action, but it may have been influenced by, of course, this concept of sitting on a man, right? This practice in, of course, Nigeria, of Black women, Nigerian women, African women, taking umbrage with the untoward behavior of a man for what, irrespective of what he was doing, and protesting by going to his job, going to his home, and of course, protesting ad nauseum until he was willing to acquiesce to their demands and make it right on whatever wrong he committed. So, once again, family, tap in, be part of the conversation. You're watching LaMoveSpeaks.com, a Black empowerment initiative, in conjunction with Beacon Line Network, the Pan African social media extraordinaire, and the home of African centered news and information. And you are, of course, we are here on Pan African Saturday, wishing everyone a happy Pan African Saturday. And let's have a conversation about the Afro Women's War and, of course, Black sisters in the struggle, Black women's political agency, advocacy, and activism in the Western Hemisphere. And on the continent, I don't think that you can even ever discuss this issue without bringing up, of course, a Queen Mother who just transitioned to the ancestral realm, and that is, of course, Assata Shakur. So we're going to make sure that we do a show honoring Queen Mother Assata, right, on her birthday. Next year, we're going to make sure that we do that. I might work on that, putting that together this evening so we can make sure that we do a show honoring, of course, the great ancestor and sister in the struggle, Queen Mother Assata Shakur. So tap in, family, be part of the conversation. We might even do it sooner, simply because, as you all know, we had the Pan African Leadership Series as well, where we honor, of course, great Pan Africans of the past to learn how to make better Pan Africans, make a better world for African people in the future. And so we need to get back started on that, and we have some time to do so. So definitely, family, tap in, be part of the conversation. If not, we're going to call it the evening and wish you all well. But definitely want you all to tap in and be part of the conversation. You're watching, of course, LaMoveSpeaks.com, a Black empowerment initiative in which we believe we can gain a competitive advantage by always better than Black, in conjunction with Beacon Line Network, the Pan African social media extraordinaire, and the home of African centered news and information. Now, see, for those of you all watching on Twitter, I'm going to put the link in the chat on Twitter so that you all can tap in and be part of the conversation as well. Don't want you all to miss out. So give me 1 second. We're going to square things away here on Twitter. Well, X, formerly known as Twitter. Please forgive me. All right, so you all can have a conversation, a chance to be part of the conversation as well. So give me 1 second, and we will square this away for you. Yes. Okay, give me 1 second. Okay, so yeah, if you're watching on Twitter, the link is in the chat now. So you can tap in and be part of the conversation if you're so inclined to do so. But once again, we're discussing, of course, the Afro Women's War. This is the 96th anniversary of the Afro Women's War that began, of course, on November 1929 in southeastern Nigeria. And of course, we're also going to discuss the history, prominence, and importance of Black women's political agency, advocacy, and activism on the continent and throughout the diaspora. And I would be remiss if I don't mention Sister Farida, who, of course, is a powerful sister. We've been looking to bring her on the show, the platform, and share with us some of the great work she's doing not only on the continent, but even in the diaspora. But also her goal of course, forming a true democracy in Togo, and you may be unaware, of course, of the dictatorial presidential regime in Togo. And so we want to make sure that we're doing what we can to support her in that work as well. If you haven't, of course, read her book, you want to make sure that you pick up her book, Melancholy of the Oppressed, right? And we, of course, will post a link to that on our channel as well. So, Kevin, aka Mr. K, what's the word, brother? I know I know the answer that you would give, but let me know. Put a 1 in the chat if you are familiar with the ABBA Women's War, and put a 2 in the chat, brother, if you are unfamiliar with the ABBA Women's War. So put a 1 in the chat, Mr. K, if you are aware. Put a 2 in the chat if you are unaware of the ABBA Women's War of 1929. And brother, we still got to get you to tap in at some point on the channel. As you know, you do not have the camera. You do not have the camera. You do not have the camera. And of course, you can use a pseudonym to, of course, be part of the conversation. We understand that for many people, they want to protect their identity and maintain a level of anonymity. And we understand that 100% as we do touch on and discuss some rather hot button and charged political and historical topics. So definitely, brother, what are your thoughts on the ABBA Women's War? I shared, of course, my view, my understanding, my perspective. But of course, I would argue that you're one of the resident historians here at Beacon Network, and of course, LamovaSpeaks.com. We'd love to hear from you in terms of what are your thoughts regarding the significance of the ABBA Women's War of 1929. So, brother, once again, the link is in the description. If you could tap in and be part of the conversation, you could keep your camera off. That would be greatly appreciated. But if not, please, at the very least, you could put your comments in the chat. But we would love for you to tap in and be part of the convo as we look to, of course, discuss the significance of the ABBA Women's War as we honor the moral obligation to remember. And once again, family, if you're watching on Twitter, I see there are quite a few of you who are. The link is in the comment section of the video. And so you can, of course, hit the link, tap in, and be part of the conversation. And let me know, what is the next show that you all would like for me to do? What topic would you like for me to do a show on? So tap in, family, be part of the combo before we call it a evening. Absolutely. 1 November. November to remember, as they say. So tap in, family, be part of the conversation. Love to hear from you all regarding the ABBA Women's War, lessons from history, honoring the moral obligation to remember the ABBA Women's War of 1929, 96 years ago. So we know we have a long, storied history of unapologetically standing against, of course, oppression that never stopped, and we hope that it will never end. So once again, to say my take on it, is that event was a historical sign of African resistance to the colonial onslaught, that African women were no joke freedom fighters. It's a 10-4. Overstood. So tap in, family, be part of the convo. I'd love to hear from you all regarding, of course, the ABBA Women's War of 1929. If not, we're going to close out and wish you all a good evening. But I hope that we can have, of course, a productive conversation regarding the ABBA Women's War of 1929. The link is in the description. The link is in the chat. If you're watching, I see we have a couple viewers. We're doing a simulcast right now, of course, Lamova Speaks, Beacon Network, and Ghanaian Beauty. So if you're willing to tap in and be part of the conversation, please do. We'd love to hear from you all. As you all know, it's a Pan-African platform, so irrespective of where you are in the world, if you are African, you can be part of the conversation. So link is in the description. Link is in the chat. Tap in, family. Y'all know what it is. It's LamovaSpeaks.com, where we always bet on Black. And you know, we believe that we gain a competitive advantage in the world by always betting on Black. Ooh, okay, hold up. Okay, I see you, brother. You said, thanks to you, Lamova. I'm now starting to use the term Afrophobia for Pan-African detractors. Well, you know, brother, I gotta say, you know, I didn't come up with that on my own. Sister, but we're gonna actually have to, you know, run it back with Sister Danielle Boaz. But I actually learned about that term from her book, Banning Black Gods. She talks about religious racism here in the African diaspora, but she talks about part of the, of course, it's with the anti-black racism, the fact that black people, we're non-human, we lack culture, civilization, etc. But she's the one who was using the term Afrophobia, and that's where I got the term from. So of course, I appreciate you, brother. It's reach one, teach one, and of course, I was building, educating myself, and she used the term Afrophobia here. And so yes, I would argue that of course that is what we're finding is one of the biggest reasons why individuals are opposed to Pan-Africanism. I can recall when I was an undergraduate, when I was a community college student, when I was at junior college, and my forever mentor, Dr. Tway, said to me, one of the reasons why a lot of brothers and sisters don't celebrate Kwanzaa, particularly in the African American community, is because of its association, connection, and memory of things African. So it shut the front door. And so, right, a simpler way to state that is, of course, we have, unfortunately, we engage in a form of internalized Afrophobia. And we know that it is something that happens when individuals have been traumatized, right? They tend to take on the values, beliefs, and worldviews of those who have, of course, traumatized them. A great example of that would be what we now know and call Stockholm Syndrome. So something to consider, family. But I hope that, we can get some brothers and sisters to tap in and be part of the conversation. If not, we will, of course, close things out. But yes, Afrophobia is a real issue, right? And we know that no one's more afraid of being African than African people, right? And that, of course, is the long-term legacy of colonialism and chattel enslavement. In fact, when we look at the work of Charles Mills, who wrote, of course, a brilliant text, The Racial Contract, we know that, if you're aware that is, of course, what my dissertation, the basis of my dissertation was focusing on, of course, the work of Charles Mills. He talks about that one of the goals of the racial contract is to engage in the ideological conditioning of course, non-white people. Right? Ideological conditioning. I would make the argument that Afrophobia, of course, is an example of ideological conditioning of African people, irrespective if we're on the continent or in the diaspora. Right? So I appreciate you, brother, bringing that up. I appreciate the fact that we're able to learn from each other. As I stated before, you are one of the resident historians here at Lumumba Speaks, and because of that, brother, we are going to have to get you on and actually have to be part of a live one day. I hope you are not opposed to that. Maybe we can have a conversation offline. Just send me an email. Maybe we can have a conversation about that. So once again, family, the link is in the description. The link is in the chat. Tap in and be part of the conversation. If not, we're going to call it an evening. But we definitely would like to hear from you all, just get a brief perspective on honoring the African Women's War of 1929. This is an example of African female agency, of course, resistance, activism, advocacy to, of course, colonial rule. And we find this throughout the African world. There are numerous examples that I would be here all day until midnight, right, trying to discuss. We just want to give thanks to everyone who came out. Until next time, family, you know what to do. Always better on Black. Peace. Before you go, make sure you hit the subscribe and like button. Thank you for supporting the channel. And remember, here at Lumumba Speaks, we always bet on Black. Peace.